Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Andy Linehan, President of the City Club of Portland. Welcome to City Club and today's Friday Forum about Homeland Defense in the global war on terrorism with our guest speaker, General Ralph E. Ed Eberhart, who is Commander of the North American Aerospace Defense Command and the U.S. Northern Command. Before we begin our program, I have the usual City Club announcements. Next Friday, April 30th, City Club welcomes to the podium Harvard professor and winner of the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, Dudley Hirschbach. Professor Hirschbach will share his wry observation about the kinship of professional football, The Simpsons, freshman chemistry, and science education in a presentation titled The Impossible Takes a Little While Longer. Professor Hirschbach is in Portland with the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair, which is the world's largest pre-college celebration of science. Read more about both of these events in the bulletin, and then you can make your reservations online at www.pdxcityclub.org. In addition to our weekly Friday forum, City Club also has two other events coming up this week. On Monday, April 26th, our book discussion group Citizens Read meets at the Zimmerman Community Center in the Pearl District to talk about Richard Florida's The Rise of the Creative Class. Economist Joe Courtwright will lead the discussion that night. Then the next day, on Tuesday the 27th, City Club welcomes members, current members, members who've recently joined, and those considering joining, to a fun after-work meet and greet to get better acquainted with the club and learn about opportunities to get involved. Get the details of both of these events in the bulletin or online at our website. It's a perfect time to connect with more than 100 other new members who have joined since the beginning of this year. And to entice you even more to sign up as a City Club member today, we're going to be holding a raffle for the new members who've joined this week. Join today and we'll put your name into this week's drawing, for which the prize is lunch with our ever-erudite State Representative Greg McPherson. This is a great opportunity to chat about the legislative process and public service. Membership brochures and forms are on each table or available from a staff member. Join City Club today and you could be our next winner. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Kaiser Permanente, Pope & Talbot, Inc., and Shorebank Pacific. We're very grateful for their support. I'd like to also remind you that City Club offers today's program on audio CD as well as videotape for purchase. So on to our program. Although the news reports of casualties among Oregon soldiers brings home the war in Iraq to us on a regular basis, few Oregonians are familiar with how the DoD has reorganized to reflect its new emphasis on homeland defense. The war on terrorism has stimulated an unprecedented level of coordination among the branches of the armed services, the intelligence agencies, and domestic public safety agencies such as the FBI. The Northern Command, or Northcom, is a newly created unified command charged with defending the U.S. against potential armed threats, as well as natural disasters, and providing support to local, state, and other federal authorities. Our speaker today, General Eberhart, is Commander-in-Chief of the North American Aerospace Defense Command and Commander of the United States Northern Command at Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado. I will let the General explain to us the function of these two commands, but let me end my introduction by highlighting a few elements of the General's distinguished career. General Eberhart's staff experience includes positions with the Air Force, the Tactical Air Command, Joint Staff, Air Combat Command, Air Force Space Command, and U.S. Space Command. General Eberhart has commanded a flight, squadron, wing, numbered Air Force, and two major commands, as well as one sub-unified command, two unified command, and one binational command. And he'll probably tell us about what all those things mean, for us who are ignorant in Oregon. While commander of the 363rd Tactical Fighter Wing during Operation Desert Shield, the unit established the theater's initial air-to-ground combat capability from a forward operating location. While serving as the commander of U.S. forces in Japan, he was awarded the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Sacred Treasure by the Emperor of Japan. And as a command pilot, he has logged more than 4,500 hours, primarily in fighter and trainer aircraft, including 300 combat missions as a forward air controller in Vietnam. Welcome, General Eberhart.
They tell me this works. Is it on yet? Huh? Well, thank you very much for that much too nice of introduction. I can remember as a young officer aspiring to one day have a biography like that. But now I know that if you have a biography that's that long, it just means one thing: you're really old. You're really old. And I'd also like to acknowledge somebody who's even older than I am, but a great mentor, a great role model for many of us, for all of us in the United States Air Force, who built the United States Air Force you have today. And that's my good friend, Tony McPeak. Thank you, sir. You know, after lunch, after dinner, speaking is always a challenge. Public speaking is a challenge. I'm reminded of what Adlai Stevenson once said about public speaking. And I look around the room, I see some people old enough to know who Adlai Stevenson is, or was. And he said that public speaking is a division of labor. This afternoon, my job is to talk, your job is to listen, and hopefully we'll finish about the same time, okay? It is great to be in your beautiful city, in this great state of Oregon, City of Roses, as I understand it. And I have it on good authority that you had a rose parade well before Pasadena. Is that right? Is that right? And for those of you who are of English descent, today is, in England, they are wearing a red rose because it is their national day. It's St. George's Day, and it commemorates the slaying of the dragon by St. George, and the red rose supposedly depicts the blood from that dragon. So it's a very special day there. It's a day of roses, if you will, in our staunch ally, England. And when you talk about that alliance and our other friends around the world, we're reminded of this global war on terrorism that we're joined together in fighting. And the very important role that the Oregon National Guard is playing in that global war on terrorism in what I call the away game, whether it's in Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere else on the globe, and the home game, for our homeland defense and our homeland security. It's a militia that traces its heritage back to 1843, the Oregon Territory. It's a militia, a National Guard that's well respected across our 54 states and territories, and in many ways leads the way in terms of, again, professionalism, valor in battle, and our heart goes out to those who have been deployed, and especially to the young man we lost in the war. I'm here to visit the Oregon National Guard, to meet with them tomorrow, and it's a wonderful opportunity to get with you today and talk to you about Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, and talk to you about the two commands that are directly involved in that: North American Aerospace Defense Command and Northern Command. First, North American Aerospace Defense Command. It's a binational command. It's Canada and the United States. It's a command that was formed in 1957 to counter the Soviet Union, a command that served us exceptionally well during the Cold War and contributed to the winning of that war, a command that was re-engineered after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the implosion of the Soviet Union, and focused on air sovereignty during the 1990s. It's a command that on September 11, 2001, sent fighters into the sky to respond to the hijackings that turned into kamikaze attacks. You've read a lot over the last 2.5 years about what NORAD did and did not do that morning and should have done in the years and months leading up to that attack. Ground truth is that NORAD was charged to support the FAA in the event of a hijacking. Our role was to respond to the request from FAA to get airborne, fly, shadow the hijacked airplane, say whether the hijacked airplane was following the instructions of the air traffic controller of FAA, and in a terrible situation that airplane crashed or that airplane exploded in midair, document that tragedy. Many people will talk about that they knew that there was going to be an attack. They knew that people were going to take over an aircraft and fly it into a building. I can tell you that there was no credible intelligence at that time to go build a defense against that type of attack. Tragically, we were wrong. We were wrong. And since 9/11, and you see it out here daily at your airport with your Oregon National Guard, we are prepared to respond to the hijacking of an aircraft and, if necessary, shoot down that aircraft. Shoot down that aircraft. Now, in pilot talk, if we get to that point, we're out of airspeed and ideas. We should never get to that point. We should hunt, attack, kill terrorists as far from our shores as we possibly can. We should continue and use all technology available to make sure that our airports are as secure as possible. And then once we get on board that aircraft, through hardened doors into the cockpit, air marshals, we must ensure that no one takes over control of that aircraft. That's the right way to work the problem, not to shoot the airplane down. And the foundation of all this is sharing information with our friends and allies around the world, intelligence, information, fusing that together so, as the Secretary of Defense has said, we can connect the dots and we can find those terrorists before they pose a threat to you, me, our families, our friends, and our loved ones. Let's talk to Northern Command for a few minutes. Northern Command is a U.S.-only unified command. Unified meaning that we have representatives from all of the services, all of the armed forces of the United States of America. And when I say all of the armed forces, all of the services, I include the fifth service that often we forget, and that's the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard is an integral part of Northern Command. In fact, we have, in my view, two mentors, two experts in terms of Homeland Defense and Homeland Security. One is the militia that's been doing it since the 1630s, 1843 here in Oregon, and the Coast Guard that's been doing Homeland Defense and Homeland Security since 1790. On the morning of 9/11, the President and Secretary of Defense were reminded of an organizational flaw that we have had for decades as we look at our Homeland Defense. And that organizational flaw was that we didn't have one command, one commander in charge of Homeland Defense and providing support for Homeland Security. In sports talk, that's like having 3 or 4 head football coaches. In business talk, 3 or 4 CEOs. In academia, 3 or 4 college presidents. So they had to go to 3 or 4 commanders that day as we decided what we were going to do to secure this nation. And I'm not criticizing anybody other than myself, because I was involved in those debates in the 90s as we were trying to decide how we establish one command, one commander to be responsible for this, but it made our head hurt and we never got our arms around it. Now, I can't tell you that would have changed the outcome of that day, but it was certainly changed and simplified our reaction after those attacks occurred. So they decided that very day that we were going to fix that problem. And the fix was United States Northern Command. We are like all of those other unified commands, most of which were established with the National Security Act of 1947, Pacific Command, European Command, Southern Command, and that we have a designated geographical area of responsibility. And we are charged with protecting our interest, particularly our citizens and our friends and allies in that area of responsibility. So first and foremost, we're like all those other geographical combatant commands, as we refer to them, unified commands. But there's one thing that's notably different about Northern Command. Pacific Command shares it to some extent. And that is, as you look at our geographical area of responsibility, our homeland is in our geographical area of responsibility. The crown jewels are in our area of responsibility. All things aren't equal in our area of responsibility. So we have the additional mission of providing support to civil authorities against all hazards, natural, man-made, to include terrorists, when one, the governor of the state requests, and two, the President and Secretary of Defense decide that that support is warranted. One-stop shopping, if you will, for military support to civil authorities, usually through a lead federal agency. In most cases, that will probably be FEMA, the Department of Homeland Security. In some cases, it could be FBI, the Department of Justice. And it could even be the Postal Department, if you have to deliver the mail, which we did in the early 90s during the postal strike. But again, one-stop shopping, one command, one commander, focusing on this type of support all day, every day. Now, what do we think the value added is? We may be a little prejudiced and parochial here, but the military understands how to plan. We understand how to train. We understand how to exercise. And once that exercise is over, we know how to critique ourselves and go back and revise the plan. We know how to do that. We've grown up doing that. So we believe we bring that discipline, that rigor, to all aspects of Homeland Security. So as we stood up this command just about 2 years ago, as we started bringing people together, we started with these large groups of what we called senior leader seminars. And oftentimes we would have anywhere from 30 to 50 different government organizations represented in that room. And what was disappointing but not surprising was in most cases that's the first time they'd ever been in that room together. But what was very encouraging is what you heard around the table. Because around that table prior to 9/11, you know what the debate would have been about? Who's in charge? But because of the tragic events of 9/11, the debate was not about and has not been about who's in charge. The debate has been, what can we best do? What's the right thing to do to protect this nation and the citizens of this great nation, our infrastructure? And folks, we've come a long way. We've come a long way. But the worst thing we can do is rest on our laurels. I'll close by saying that there are two things that bother me, that I worry about each and every day. And one is, what are the terrorists planning as we speak that we haven't thought of, that we have not trained to, exercised, and built a plan for? Secondly, it's back to what I call our good but short memory. In many cases, that good but short memory has served us well in this nation. Because we fought someone 100 years ago or 50 years ago, we don't still hold a grudge. We get over it. We move beyond it. It's a melting pot. We welcome people from those nations into this great nation. But we must not forget about 9/11 until we win the global war on terrorism. That's what they're counting on. They're counting on time working for them and against us. And I'm convinced that since 9/11, time has worked for us as we continue to unravel terrorist organizations, terrorist cells out there. But if we let down our guard, if we break our pace, if you will, then we're setting ourselves up for another attack. I'll close this thought with what the President said at the most recent State of the Union address. Our greatest responsibility is the active defense of the American people. 28 months have passed since September 11th, 2001. Over 2 years without an attack on American soil. And it is tempting to believe that the danger is behind us. That hope is understandable, comforting, and false. And false. I welcome your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Eberhart. One of the advantages of being a City Club member is that City Club members can ask questions of our speakers. Our first question today will come from our board host, who is Heather Kmetz. She's a tax attorney with Hannah Strader, and she's co-chair of the City Club's New Leaders Council. Following Heather's question, we'll open up the microphones to any other City Club members. In fact, you can line up behind the mics before Heather has finished her question. And as you do that, please identify yourself as a club member and limit your question to 30 seconds, and please keep it a question. So we'll start with Heather Kmetz.
I like that instruction. I like that.
I'll do a big question mark. For a question.
General, in your comments today, you acknowledged that the media has had several varying discrepancies as to whether or not the scenario of 9/11 was among those scenarios that was within the purview of the Department of Defense in advance of 9/11. Presuming that you guys get together and periodically sift through reliable and unreliable terrorist threats and put together scenarios and potential plans as to how those would be addressed, did any of those plans serve you well on 9/11? And have any of that planning process changed since 9/11?
I believe that planning, exercising, if you will, training, served us well on 9/11 because it enabled us to do several things. It enabled us, one, because of a plan we had on the shelf from the Cold War, to realize that there was an option to close down the airspace. The decision being to stop all further takeoffs and all airplanes that were airborne, get them on the ground as soon as possible, and ideally not to the airport they were headed for. To, if there were more terrorists out there on board aircraft, to confuse them, complicate their problems. And then all the overseas inbound aircraft, divert them to Canada or turn them around and send them home. Now, we don't have any concrete information that says that we thwarted any more terrorist attack as a result of that, but I can tell you that I will always believe we did. I will always believe we did. But we don't have any credible intelligence that says that we in fact did that. Secondly, because we had people who understood air defense alert, understood how to go out and do an air patrol over a population center, over key infrastructure, I believe that there were a follow-on attack that were going to come in the next several days because of our ability to put as many airplanes in the air as we did over the next couple of days, that they didn't think twice about this. They thought twice about this, if you will, and decided not to follow through if they had plans to follow through. And I believe that it's good news and bad news. I believe because of the additional aircraft we have on alert today, the relationship that we have with FAA, so we know as soon as they know there's a problem, There was 20, 25 minutes lag that day, and it's a time distance problem. For all of these reasons, I believe that terrorists are going to pick another way to attack us next time. So we have to be prepared to deal with what we saw in the last war, but the worst thing we can do is only prepare for the last war. So I think it's, again, good news and bad news. We're much better prepared to deal with that type of attack than we were on 9/11. But that causes, in my view, them to think about another way to attack you. So we must postulate what that might be. But folks, again, I don't care how many airplanes you give us. We can't make this, where we're completely safe out there. So the right way to do this is you don't let them get on the airplanes. You capture and kill them elsewhere. And so we can't be misled into thinking that this is foolproof.
Carol Witherell, City Club member. You asked, what are we going to do to secure this nation? My question is there a parallel path that is of equal importance to intelligence and military efforts? Might we rebuild our now nearly decimated diplomatic relations with other nations of the world and with the UN through diplomacy, alliance building, responsible participation and leadership in environmental and arms control treaties, and addressing the conditions of poverty, injustice, oppression, and failure to educate women that fuel terrorism? Aren't these parallel paths that we must be talking about together?
Yes. And I say that very sincerely. I mean, there's a couple things I don't exactly agree with in terms of decimated, et cetera. But I must say that if you think I'm saying the answer is we can go out there and capture and kill every terrorist and wipe terrorists off the face of the map, for every terrorist we capture or kill, given the conditions we see out there, which I think is what you're addressing, there are going to be tens more. And so this is not the right way to work this problem. But it's a finger in the dike until we can work it properly. But we have to correct the conditions that causes this type of terrorism to develop, and to develop to where it is today. There's no question about that. I mean, Tom Friedman will talk to you about the sitting around guys, the people who don't have anything else to do, and they're very unhappy, so they are easy to recruit in terrorism. It's a question of poverty, it's a question of education, it's a question of opportunity. A story might not be a great story, but I think you can go to one Muslim country, and the little boy will be walking with his father and point to the big house and say, "One day, Father, I am going to live in that house." It is a country of opportunity. It's a country of the values where people know they have an opportunity to move up. In the other country, the little boy be walking with his father, point to the big house and say, "Father, one day I will kill the man in that big house." Because there's no opportunity there. His condition is not going to change. So you're exactly right. I mean, we're working the here and now, finger in the dike problem, Homeland Defense, Homeland Security. But we've got to have a grander, better plan, and people are working that. It's just a question. It's going to take time, and we're not very patient people, but we've got to stay the course.
Bill Parrish, City Club member. General Eberhart, my question relates to economic security. There's a tremendous amount of dollars changing hands with respect to this Iraq situation. And one of the concerns a lot of people have is they want to make sure they're well spent. Let me give one example. Information security, computers. The Microsoft operating system completely dominates. Now, apparently, their largest customer is the Pentagon. A lot of people are concerned about the whole notion of information security, especially when President Bush's top advisor was a former Microsoft executive. Is there anything you can say with respect to computer security in general?
I'm sorry, I missed the verb.
Is there anything you can say with respect to computer security in general?
In general, we are very concerned about computer security. We've been concerned about that for a long time, but with each year, as we become more reliant on our computer systems, how it's all netted together, there's no doubt in our mind that we've become so reliant on that the enemy realizes that's an Achilles heel of sorts. So when we talk about computer network defense, as we talk about information assurance, computer assurance, if you will, there's a lot of effort ongoing to make sure that we can rely on those systems and that we can provide our men and women who go into combat the right connectivity, the right situational awareness to succeed in the battle space. I think I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to pick up on the Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a lot of effort. My previous job, I was commander of U.S. Space Command. As commander of U.S. Space Command, we were involved with computer network operations, which was both computer network defense and computer network attack. And each and every day, we look at our networks out there, and we can tell you exactly how many times they've been penetrated and what the results were. And so we're very attuned to this. We're also very attuned when you talk about Homeland Defense and Homeland Security. And every time an incident happens like happened this last year up in the Northeast, the first thing that we consider is, was that a terrorist attack? Was that a terrorist attack? So we're working that very hard.
General Jim Cunningham, City Club member, United Airlines captain, and commander of the Oregon Air National Guard. As a private citizen and a member of the military, I have a vested interest in Homeland Security. Thanks for visiting with the citizens of Portland this afternoon. We appreciate it. Question I have is one for education for all of us. As Northcom begins to take its shape and develops into what I consider the most important unified command that we have, because without it we have no defense, what is the role that you see for the National Guard to play as your command takes shape?
As I alluded to in my remarks, the militia has been doing this for centuries. They understand Homeland Defense and Homeland Security, and they've been great teachers for Northern Command as we've stood up. I also realize that because of time and distance, that regardless of what happens out there, if it's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, that the first people on scene will be the first responders, policemen, firemen, emergency services workers. The next people on scene will be the militia, in this case, in this state, the Oregon National Guard. The next people on scene will be whatever help the state of Oregon decides they need from federal authorities, and however the federal authorities decide to respond. So my view is that although I am all for equipping and training the men and women of Northern Command to do this mission, it's not at the expense of monies for the first responders and the Oregon National Guard and their counterparts in the other states, because they're going to be the first ones there. And so you can equip me all you want, but if I'm late to need, I don't help you much because of time and distance. So I believe that the right answer is to make sure that your first responders, your state militia, are properly resourced to do what we expect of them in this new world order or disorder that we're seeing. Now, that doesn't mean that we say, okay, Oregon National Guard, you stay home, you stay in these geographic boundaries of the state of Oregon, and you're not going to do anything else. I think they also have to be trained and prepared to go wherever this nation needs them to go if we mobilize them and send them out to Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever. So you'll hear some people who will want them to stay home and only do Homeland Defense, Homeland Security. I think it should be broader than that. But I think as we proceed forward, Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, we need to better leverage our militia, because that's the way we're going to be successful.
Bill Savage, City Club member. General, can you comment on the security of the harbors? It just seems like that's a, with all these containers coming in and thinking right down here on the river, how vulnerable are we there?
I think, again, I hate to continue to use this expression, but it's both good news and bad news. The good news is that since 9/11, we've come a long way. We've come a long way with the National Transportation Act. We've come a long way in terms of tracking different ships, different cargoes. We've come a long way in terms of cooperation from other nations. And if you go to many of these harbors, I spent last week in a day in Miami with the cruise industry. And I'll tell you, I was very, very impressed with the security of keeping people from getting on the cruise ship with things they should not have on board a cruise ship. And I was also very impressed with the security around the cruise ship in the harbor. So we've come a long way. Now, again, is there risk there? There continues to be risk. There continues to be risk. But I believe that if we harness technology right, if we get the right cooperation out there, we'll continually reduce that risk over time. And we're headed in the right direction. And then it becomes, quite frankly, people, it becomes how much risk are you willing to accept, and how much money are you willing to spend to buy down that risk? Tough, tough decision. Tough, tough decision. But that's what we're going to be faced with in this nation. And then if you want to reduce all the risk, then we change the kind of government we have. And you don't want to do that, because that's what we're all about, is those freedoms that we hold so near and dear. So, long story short is, there's a lot of things being done in your harbors today that people aren't aware of that makes them a lot safer than they were 2 years ago. But we've got a long way to go.
General, my name is Megan Steele, City Club member. As a mother of teenage boys, I live in dread of fear of the draft. Can you please tell us what you think the probability is that it will be reinstituted, and what form it would take?
I really, any number I would give you in terms of probability would be exactly the wrong number, so I don't know. There is an increasing interest among some of our elected leadership to, in fact, reinstate the draft. I think you probably read in the paper this morning that the Secretary of Defense is not in favor of that at this time. I can tell you that personally I'm not in favor of reinstating the draft. Although that's not to say that there's not a lot of value, in my view, of the draft. But if somebody said, would you, if it were up to you, would you reinstate it or not, my answer would be no, for a variety of reasons that we don't have time to go into. But I think the decision will be one of how your elected leaders represent you in Congress, and in turn to the administration as they struggle with these issues.
Can you elaborate on your views of the benefits and disadvantages of the draft?
Well, I think the benefits of the draft, if the draft is done exactly right, if the draft is done, for example, like it is in Israel, where everyone, when they step out of high school, they go for 2 years. Everyone. Has nothing to do with how much money you have. Has nothing to do with where you have a scholarship to. It's kind of what the greatest generation was faced with. There's a lot of value added in that. The downside is that it costs a lot of money. You want to see something expensive, you train somebody for 2 years, and you keep turning this group over. Lots of money. Some cases it might affect the professionalism of the force. Secondly, I can tell you something that's fairly sensitive, but in my view, very important for those of us who were in the 60s, in the 70s, before the draft. There was a term that we heard all the time. It was lifer. You're a lifer. And that term meant you can't do anything else. You're sort of worthless, so you're going to stay in the military because you're a lifer. And I haven't heard that term, except when I've said it, for the last 25 years. Because people are volunteers, they want to be there, and it's a pretty collegial team. And it wasn't a very collegial team in some cases in the 60s and early 70s. That's not to say that we didn't have wonderful people in there doing great work who were drafted. But there was an atmosphere there that wasn't necessarily very healthy. That was probably, part of that probably was the backdrop of the Vietnam War too. But
Hi, General. My name's Jane Cease. I'm a City Club member. I'd like to have you comment on a couple of things about the relationship with the first responders around coordination and how you do that. But I guess my bigger concern is we're pretty squeezed in Oregon and a lot of other states in terms of money to fund more local police and Air National Guard stuff. And so I guess I really want to ask if you are putting together a budget, or you're being told to put together a budget, or don't put together a budget to put some money into helping both the resources of the National Guard and our local first responders. And if you're not, I
Why
guess
not?
I'd like to hear why the heck not. Thank you.
first of all, our relationship with first responders comes in many shapes and forms, if you will. Probably the most valuable relationship is the one that I alluded to earlier in terms of our exercises and our tabletop exercises and real-world exercises, most recently with the first responders in Texas and Alaska. So now when we run an exercise in Northcom, this exercise will reach right down to the first responders. And probably most importantly, as we're preparing for that exercise over the course of a year, we're working with those first responders. We better understand what they might need, when they might need it, or we figure out other ways to provide them those types of capabilities, capacities, if you will. The other thing that I believe that we help bring to this is what we call, and we struggled with in the armed forces over the years, and that is interoperability. That is, we coined the term jointness, which essentially means, and you've read about it, where at one point supposedly the Army couldn't talk to the Air Force on the radios because there were different kinds of radios. We've essentially fixed that problem in our armed forces, but we need to fix that problem in terms of Homeland Security. You might be surprised, you might not, how many cities around there where at the scene of an incident, the police department can't talk to the fire department on the radio. So we believe by getting these people together, we help work this interoperability problem, and we're essentially building a new coalition. And when we flow money, I am all for, as I said earlier, we need to properly resource our first responders and our militia. Now, my budget is to pay the people in the headquarters, so I don't provide that kind of money, but I advocate for that kind of money. So I don't have that budget, but I advocate for it. But I'll tell you one thing that I also say is we need to put strings on that money so that when we send it to the city of Portland, they can't spend it any way they want to. Because if we do, let's not use Portland, that's probably not a good example. Let's use St. Louis. I'm from St. Louis, okay? So you go to St. Louis, so the local vendor in St. Louis wants you to buy their product. And you buy their product, but oh, by the way, it can't talk to Salem. It can't talk to a police force that comes down to help you from Washington State. So I believe that just like we solved the problem in the armed forces, we put strings on the money, and we said you have to buy things that are interoperable. We need to do that same thing for Homeland Security type equipment.
Carter Kennedy, City Club member. In your remarks, you used the term, if I remember, gotta fight this war on terrorism until it's over. And if I can go from the specific to the large picture, I want to ask, in all seriousness, how will we know it's over, or will we?
I hate that question. I hate that question. I mean, that is a difficult question, and that is one that I can tell you, I don't know. I don't know. It's not like unconditional surrender on the battleship Missouri at the end of World War II. It's not like the Soviet Union imploding and the wall coming down. It's not because we've gone 2.5 years or even 5 years or maybe even 10 years without a terrorist attack. I personally believe that whoever's around then will be smart enough to know that it's over, that it's over. But I can't tell you, because I think it gets back to the very first question, and that is when we take away those conditions that set the stage for terrorism, we're going to know it's over.
General, I'm impressed with the burden of responsibility you have on yourself, and as a manager, I presume that you are looking for new ways to manage, new ways to think about these difficult problems. The fellow who invented Visa happens to live in Seattle and wrote a book called The Birth of the Chaotic Age, which is a different way of organizing things. I'm not saying that that is appropriate to your situation, but my question is, what kinds of new ways of thinking, new ways of managing do you see as promising in the task that you have?
There are several things that come to mind, especially if we look the midterm and the longer term. And I must admit, for the last 1.5 years, we've been working our inbox and sort of trying to kill the alligators as opposed to drain the swamp. But I truly believe that we are going to have relationships between the federal, state, and first responders that are much different than any relationships that we've experienced during the course of this nation's development. I also believe, and this is again a fairly sensitive issue, but in some ways, the way we are organized and the thresholds that exist cause us to be late to need with capabilities that might be very, very important. We might be able to decide that for a hurricane or a flood, we can exhaust the resources of the local responders. And then we go to surrounding communities in the state. And then we go with other federal help. And then finally we go to the U.S. active duty military. That might be okay for a flood or a hurricane. But I'll tell you, I worry about is that okay for a chemical or a biological attack? Because if you wait for each one of those thresholds to unfold, you've got a bigger and bigger and bigger mess. Where if we as a nation decided initially to throw everything we had on that problem, it wouldn't get nearly as bad as it will if you wait for it to go, it's bad, it's getting worse, and then you finally bring everything you have to bear when it's out of control. And in some ways, that's the same situation for forest fires. So I believe that that's one of the things that we're going to have to look at in terms of this interagency relationship across the federal government, and then right on down to the first responders, and what truly makes sense in today's world, and how do we approach some of these problems in a different way,
Chris Smith, City Club member. General, I think we'd probably all agree that we live in a politically divided climate right now, whether that's partisan politics or different views of our venture in Iraq at the moment. And I realize that your job is not political, but I have to wonder if, particularly in your command with the Homeland as the major area of your command, how does the lack of political unity affect your job and what you have to do?
I've not seen it affect what we have to do in the command, if you will, where the rubber meets the road, but obviously, in some cases, it affects the funding when you go to committees in Congress, and in some cases, it causes positions to be taken that, in fact, might not be the position that you think should be taken. And I say this, I'm not saying, well, because it's a Republican administration, the people who do that are Democrats. That's not my point. My point is that sometimes people are against something because the other party is for it, as you well know. But I can tell you that I don't have our budget has been fully funded. There's not been a situation where we've been kept from doing something by the Congress. So it hasn't affected us directly. And I think that's ought to be exactly how it should be, because oftentimes you hear about, okay, this is a bipartisan effort. Our guys and gals are overseas at war, and we should not make this political. Well, I think that's very, very important for the away game, but it's even more important for the home game. It's even more important when you talk about Homeland Defense and Homeland Security.
Hello, I'm Cynthia Kirk, City Club member. And this is sort of a two-part question. I'm really happy to hear that you believe, as I do, that the next time the terrorists strike, it's going to be in a completely different way from 9/11, and that you are trying to think and manage differently. But I want to go a little bit deeper and ask, what are you doing to really think like a terrorist? What are you doing in terms of staffing to bring in people, whether military or not, who have experience with, knowledge of, and even sympathy for other cultures, even our enemy cultures? And the second part is, I know intelligence is not your responsibility, but they support you. And they're the preemptive area, and I'm wondering how you feel intelligence has improved since 9/11.
It's an excellent point. I mean, it's easy to sit down with what we call red teams. These red teams being a group of people who are trying to think like the enemy and postulate what the enemy might do. And then they hand that to us, and then we say, okay, how could we keep them from doing this? That's not very helpful if the red team looks like me, okay? That's not very helpful, because in good, bad, I don't know, but I don't think that way. And these terrorists that we've seen don't think the way I think, obviously. So my point is that we have tried to reach out. We have tried to reach out to people who have that kind of heritage. We've tried to reach out to academia. We've tried to reach out to people in the reserve and guard who have other jobs, if you will, that allow them to have better insight into these kinds of things, and populate our red team with those type of people. Now, do we have this exactly right? Can we do it better? No and yes. No, we don't have it exactly right. Yes, we can do it better, and we're trying to do it better. And in many cases, we populate these red teams. Of course, you have to be careful with captured terrorists. And so that's very, very important to help us try to get inside their mind and what they might be thinking. But we can do it better, and we need to look for ways to do it better. But this also gets back to the bigger issue of how do we correct the conditions that caused all this. We must better understand those cultures. Secondly, intelligence. At the end of the first Gulf War, one of the biggest challenges we had in our armed forces was sharing intelligence from what we called the strategic to the tactical level. Because much of the strategic intelligence we gained through organizations that were still of a Cold War ilk. And they were not designed to share information at the tactical level. And so we spent the 90s trying to correct that problem so that we could move intelligence around inside our military organizations. And you didn't hear much of that criticism in Bosnia and Kosovo and now in Iraqi freedom. But one thing that we weren't working on in the 90s is how we broke down the barriers between law enforcement, intelligence, and other information that's out there in open text. And how do you put all that together with the military intelligence to come up with something that's going to help you, again, connect the dots, get a picture to protect this nation. So prior to 9/11, I would have told you that what bothered me the most is what somebody else knew and they weren't telling me. Every morning in our intelligence meeting this morning, before I left Colorado Springs, the FBI is sitting there. The CIA is sitting there. The Defense Intelligence Agency. NSA is sitting there. The whole alphabet soup of the intelligence organizations, both military and other law enforcement intelligence organizations. And we're sharing information back and forth in accordance with the laws of the land. And so now I'm not worried about what somebody else knows and they're not telling me. I'm worried about what we all don't know. So we've come a long way. We've got a lot farther to go, but it goes back to reinvigorating our human intelligence, people who are out there in the field, who think like, act like, can interact with those who might be our enemies. I hear the hook here.
Question.
Sorry. I'm the last question. General John Polnick, new City Club member, so you are the lucky recipient of my first City Club question.
Great, great.
Membership does have its benefits. Two questions.
Two questions.
It's a privilege, okay. What are the policies and ideas that the military is tossing around to recruit and retain quality men and women for the services? And do you think that policies that are in place right now that disallow certain classes of citizens are still valid?
The military is always taking a look across the different skill sets we need to make sure that we, in fact, can recruit and retain the quality force that we know is so very, very important. So we use a variety of things. We use bonuses. We use professional pays. We use a variety of things like that to make sure that we get those experts, if you will, in a variety of areas. Now, if you left it completely up to me, I wouldn't do it that way. I would increase the base pay across everyone so that we, in fact, don't have those who have special pays and those who don't working side by side each other. And secondly, those bonuses that you get, they don't affect your retirement. In other words, if you get the money in your base pay, then that helps you in retirement. But bonuses stay back here. And sometimes you outgrow them, you certainly retire out of them. But we're in fact doing a variety of things to make sure that we have the skill sets filled that we need. We also have gone out in some skill sets. If we think that we don't have to have somebody wearing a uniform, we'll fill that skill set with, or part of that skill set, with civilian government employees or contractors. In terms of the classes of people that we take and we don't take, obviously there are issues in terms of physical capacities, whether these people are able to go into the desert of Iraq and live in those kinds of conditions, how mobile they are, etc. But I believe that there is a provision for almost anybody who wants to serve, at least in the civilian government employee area. If you're talking, again, about sexual persuasion, if that's what you're really getting at without saying it, I think it's important to note that we are restricted by law. So if you don't like the policy, then we need to get the law changed, and it's not up to me or him to make this decision. It's up to the law of the land to get that changed. Because Congress made that law some 1 decade ago, I believe, to try to keep that out of our ballpark, if you will, so we didn't get beat up about it all the time, and Congress presented that law.
Well, General Eberhart, thank you very much for being with us here today. Your presentation's been I was just going to say your presentation's been sobering, but also in some ways reassuring, knowing that there's someone as experienced and thoughtful as you in your role. So thank you, and City Club is adjourned.